Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of stream where we talk about the history of Middle Earth. And this is a celebration kind of stream. We usually have a history of Middle Earth at every 100 followers. And when we got to 1,300 followers, we had episode 13, and the people in the chat were very excited about the context and content. We were talking about the island of Numenor, which is in our sort of progression through the history of Middle Earth into the Second Age. And I mentioned sort of offhand that there was actually quite a bit of material that I had left out of the discussion, specifically dealing with the plants and animals of Numenor. And everybody got kind of excited about that. And I said, well, maybe I will do a sort of special episode when we get halfway through. So when we pass 1,350 followers, and we're actually now at 1,361, so we're only 39 away from having a whole other History of Middle Earth stream. So anyway, I do want to address, rather obviously, I'm in the same room, but I have painted the wall behind me, which is what I did most of yesterday and almost all of today. Well, not all of today. I also had to go get paint, and then I had to get some groceries, and I put a doorknob on the door, and I made this outline. Anyway, it's been a busy few days, but this is the new color of the wall, and I will be adding more shelving here and here in the coming days. But I like it a lot. You can actually see me. There's some contrast between my pasty skin and the color of the wall. So I'm actually showing up better on camera, which may or may not be a bonus to the stream. But anyway, this is one of the reasons why when you saw me streaming on Tuesday this week, all of the shelves were empty. You don't even recognize me anymore. Wow. Dang it. I'm trying to watch all your YouTube videos. Sam, what's up? So let me say hello to everybody. Matt, welcome in. Tuna is here. Good to see you, Tuna. Sam is here. Kyle is here. Joseph is here. Welcome in. One does not go full Gandalf, leaping long into Numenor. Yeah, I agree. Moose is on a watch streak. Welcome in, Moose. Hope you're doing well. So yeah, we're going to do kind of an interesting little talk today, and it's not probably going to take as long as a normal stream, though as soon as I say that, what will end up happening inevitably is that we're going to have an incredibly lively chat, and I'm going to spend a lot of time answering questions, which is perfectly fine. Oh, my bad. It's not Joseph. I saw Joseph, and it's not Joseph. My bad. That's the love of my dyslexia coming back at me, because I saw the letters and my brain is just like, these are how these letters go together. So is it Jospe or Jospe? Is the O long or short? Okay. So, yeah. One general note. Well, actually, two general notes. First general note. As a reminder, if you are... Yos. Okay. I gotcha. If you are interested in learning more about the Second Age, and you are... not sure where to look, the current best source for Second Age material is this book here. This is The Fall of Numenor by Brian Sibley, who actually edited together a lot of Tolkien's own writings. The majority of this material comes from the History of Middle Earth books, which are quite long, rather extensive, and include a lot of what we might call sort of academic footnotes that were written by Christopher Tolkien. They can be a little imposing if you're not really into deep academic comparison sort of writing. But this is an excellent book. It is arranged chronologically, and a lot of the material that we're going to be talking about tonight comes pretty much straight out of this. So you can give this a find. It's a really, really good book, and I'm very glad to have obtained this from a friend of the channel who hooked me up with this book. It was a great thing. If you are, again, just so interested, you can look there. J is a little stronger than the Y, but it sounds wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to be seeing your friend Geek Hay Tuesday at his reading at Lillian H. Smith Library in Toronto. Excellent. I'll hope that goes well for you. Anyway, so let's kind of get at it. So that was note number 1. And note number 2, as just sort of a general reminder here specifically in History of Middle-earth, anytime we talk about Numenor, we have to remember that in the lore of Middle-earth, Numenor itself lasts for several thousand years, but it falls into the ocean. Spoilers. And it gets destroyed at the end of the Second Age. So most of the documents and historical sources that exist within the history of Middle-earth, so sort of like in the world, are going to be written by people that escaped from Numenor. These were the first people that, well, they're not the first people, but they're the ones that are going to stay on in Middle-earth and run the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. These are people like Elendil, Isildur, Anarion. These people that are sort of the kings of the early Third Age. So it's worth pointing out that most of the original histories of the Numenorians that they wrote themselves were lost. And because of that, we are left with always this little grain of speculation where we can rely to a certain extent on the memories of these Numenorians who escaped to Middle-earth after the collapse of the Second Age. But the earliest histories, especially the very, very earliest histories of the Numenorians arriving on the island, are lost in time. So just a weird little contextual notice there to try to put us in the mindset. Guy Gavriel Gay, he wrote the Finovar Tapestry and helped Christopher Tolkien collate and assemble the Silmarillion in the 70s. Excellent. What's up, Silver? You've known her for a while? Excellent. That would be really neat. The Silmarillion is one of my favorite writings that Tolkien ever did, and of course it wasn't finished while he was alive. His son Christopher was instrumental in orchestrating and arranging all of that into some narrative form that had already existed, but in a more compact and concise sort of way. What's up, Claire? Good to see you. Welcome in. All right.
You shall have camels,
let's start
an armed escort, provisions,
corgi bits,
desert vehicles, and tanks.
You're welcome.
And for some reason, that didn't show up the right way. So I'm not sure exactly what was going on there. I hope you all heard the lovely corgi bits being announced, but mine did not go off. But we've been having problems with audio alerts for quite some time now, and apparently I fixed that in one of my sets of streaming layouts, but not across all of my sets. You heard it, but you didn't see it. Super. One more thing to work on, but I've got time because it's summer, so there we go. All right. Yeah, so let's talk about some animals. And again, this is just going to be kind of basic, like what kind of animals live in Numenor. There are a lot, but a few things that are kind of interesting to put about these animals overall is that most of the animals that existed in Numenor were very, very friendly. They were not particularly scared by humans, and it did not really seem like they had ever been exposed to humans. So they were really approachable in a lot of cases. They were also quite just amenable to being around humans altogether, even the predators. And this is what's really interesting. Whereas in Middle Earth, of course, we have, really mean things that live out in the woods that want to kill you all the time. Most of the animals in Numenor, even the predators, even the big predators like bears, tended to be very just kind of chill with humans. And they didn't really run across each other very much. Now, if you were to, of course, go run up to a bear and scare it, it might respond by smacking you with a big paw. But they were not really going to be at each other's odds very frequently. And most of the time, the population of predators just ate the other animals that were wild. And there wasn't even a lot of overlap between predator and domesticated fowl or domesticated sheep or horses or stuff like that that were targets of predator attack. There were only a few occasions where certain individual predators, like a one bad bear or one bad, I don't know, I guess weasel or cat or something like that, would need to be eliminated, but that was a kind of a rare thing. It's important to have animals, indeed. What's up, Yasko? Good to see you. Welcome in. So most of these animals are actually going to be pretty cool, and a lot of them are going to kind of come right into your house. And if you are a fan of something like the stereotypical Disney princess where they start singing and animals just sort of show up and light upon them or just kind of hang out in your house, this is actually Numenor. Numenor has got a lot of animals that are just really, really cool. So we can just start kind of going through. It natively did not have dogs or wolves. The dogs that existed in Numenor had to be brought over from Middle Earth, and later on they were brought over mostly as companions. They were not as hunting dogs because there was actually not really that much hunting going on in Numenor. Now, they knew how to do things like bows and spears and things like that, but they didn't really hunt that much. Most of the meat that they got was either from domesticated animals or from fishing. Fishing was actually quite big down in the south. It's like Ghibli. It's basically Studio Ghibli, but in Numenor, right? This is where Claire belongs. So no wolves, no dogs. They did have foxes, and foxes were quite plentiful, especially in the north. They did have some version of native predator cat, but these were smaller cats. They're not like mountain lions or pumas or leopards or things like that. So something more along the lines of a bobcat, perhaps, or maybe an ocelot, if we're going to refer to Archer. Are we afraid of the big bad wolf? Well, in Numenor, you don't have to be because there aren't wolves. There are these things, and this is a very Tolkien thing. Every now and then he will go off on a list of animals that exist there, and then he'll just throw out a random word. And this will be in one of his languages that he made up for. Maybe like a Scottish wildcat, yeah. But one of the animals on Numenor is this thing called a lapoldi. And it's spelled like this in the Numenorian, but it's actually going to have a couple of other different ways to be pronounced, because this comes from a Quenya word. Quenya, of course, being I said Kenya, not Quenya. Sorry, Quenya. Kenya is a country. Quenya is the High Elven language, and the best guess is that a lapoldi is just a really, really big rabbit, or perhaps something like a hare. Now, this is interesting because at different times in the text, Tolkien will refer to rabbits and hares individually, but then he also uses this word lapoldi, and we don't know if that means that there are sort of like families and genuses and species, and that lapoldi is kind of like a catch-all for all of these types of animals, or if there was a specific type of particularly unique rabbit or hare that gets called lapoldi. But we do know that they exist. They're mostly left alone. The Numenorians don't really eat them very much. But they are one of the biggest reasons why the natural predators on the island don't really seem to look towards eating the domesticated animals, because there are apparently just so many of these things that all the predators can have as much rabbit slash hare slash whatever they actually are. We don't have any pictures of these things. It'd be really great if Tolkien would have drawn us a picture of one of these, but he didn't. We do know that they have a lot of domesticated fowl. So ducks and geese were native to the island already, right? They were on the they were on the continent prior to people showing up, but they very quickly brought over other domesticated ducks and chickens and pigeons. What's really interesting about the pigeons is that they note that they keep them for their eggs, which is kind of odd. I don't know if I would ever want pigeon eggs, but yeah, so they're not eating the bunnies themselves, Claire. The foxes and the weasels and the stoats and the wild cats and the bears are eating the bunnies. But that's sort of the way that it goes, right? So I wonder if Lapoldi was his take on the Leporidae family. Yeah, see, that's a great put together there, Kyle. The way that Tolkien played with language is really, really interesting, and it's worth remembering that he very much planned a lot of the stuff in Lord of the Rings to be the actual history of England and the Isles of the area and Northern Europe, and especially Quenya words. Quenya was the older of the two languages that he invented. Quenya is based on Finnish. Finnish was one of the first languages that he really got super involved in. Well, not one of the first, but it was one of the early languages that he got very, very involved in. And it was the first language that he ever started working on that was going to specifically be for Lord of the Rings or for Middle Earth, or what he would refer to originally as the Book of Lost Tales. So there's at least a decent argument to be made that he was making words that might go on to look like words that we would have, in the same way that a lot of the place names in England are named today something from an older language, so there's this sort of continuity through time. He was a really big proponent of making things kind of feel lived in, so that's a potential, but who really knows? But that's a great point to point out. What's up, Cave Geek? Welcome in. Way to hate on the pigeons. Well, I mean, I've never had a pigeon egg, so I wouldn't know what a pigeon egg tasted like. Not allowed to say eating the. Okay, I won't. Well, see, I almost said it, but I was reading your comment, Claire, so I will not say it anymore. How many non-chicken eggs have I had? I've had a quail egg. I have had duck egg. I have had a goose egg. I think that might be it. Well, I've had a fish egg. I've had several different type of fish eggs, but that doesn't really count. That's kind of skirting the limit there, right? I don't think roe is really what you're after. Tad is here, but Tad is hitting the wall. Oh, you're commenting the wall. Yes. I painted the wall. I've had Cadbury cream eggs. I do love Cadbury cream eggs. Those are my favorite candy. I'm actually eating a bag of Cadbury mini eggs that I have been hoarding since Easter. So, and there's also Reese's eggs and all kinds of like marshmallow eggs and things like that. But we're talking about bird eggs, right? I would try a pigeon egg. I'm not opposed to having a pigeon egg. I just don't really want to go scour the city sidewalks to find a pigeon egg. You love the mini eggs, but you hate the cream eggs. Franks, that's okay. That's okay. I kind of thrive on the extra sugar, though. Aloha. Welcome in. Okay, so what else do we have? Bears. I mentioned bears. This is one of the more interesting ones of the description here. So there are both black and brown bears on Numenor, and they got along very, very well with humans, quite well. As in, bears would sometimes make house calls, as in they would just come visit you. A bear would come out of the mountains and maybe walk to your house and just kind of show up in your yard. And if you saw them at your place, it was very frequent, or it was very customary to give them something like some honey or some fruit as a sort of a welcoming gift. And if you saw them in the wild, you could even cautiously approach them and hang out a little bit. You couldn't. There wasn't any communication going on here. It wasn't as if bears and humans could talk to each other. But there was a really interesting relationship between the bears and the humans. And one of the really cool things here, well, that's Beorn, right? And Beorn is a skin changer, and we really don't know if that counts as a bear or not, but there were definitely bears in Middle-earth as well, and rather ferocious ones that hold the high pass at Carrick and stuff like that, right? Yeah, Beorn, exactly. You want a bear to come visit me? I think it would be kind of cool if, assuming, of course, that the bears were chill like they were at Numenor, that if you kind of look out in your backyard and there's a bear just kind of sitting there like waving a paw at you and you're like, hey, it's the friend, and you go say hi to the bear and give the bear some honey, and the bear kind of gives you the nod and then kind of ambles back off. That would be kind of a cool relationship, and I would be down with that. An ostrich egg sounds like a whole meal. I would like to try an ostrich egg. I would be down with that. You don't really like chocolate, but you'll get some mini eggs. Small bag lasts you forever. Interesting. Like a supersized Saint Bernard. Kind of, sorta. So Ghibli, exactly. We're back to Ghibli. But wait, it gets better, because on a particular day, you could go to this site. The site is called Tampole. And at Tampole, which is in the northern part of the island, not too long after the prayer to Eru at Thanksgiving, which is the one that was done in the autumn, you could go to Tampole and you could watch, and I'm not joking here, the bear dance. This is correct. On this particular day, hundreds of Numenorians would go out into the woods at this place called Tampole to witness the bear dance. And bears would literally just group up and go through this sort of synchronized dance thing. And as many as 50 might show up to participate in the bear dance. And there's there's a good 2 or 3 paragraphs about this, and it's really interesting in the material. So bears apparently don't understand human laughter. They don't really like the sound of human laughter, and because they don't laugh, the way that Tolkien explains it is that it confuses them. So he says that if you didn't know what was going to happen and you went to watch the bear dance, you might actually find it kind of funny. But you're not supposed to laugh at the bears because they would get disturbed by your laughing. So if the humans went to watch, you were just supposed to be very quiet and keep your mouth shut while the bears danced. And then you just kind of left. That's great. I would be down with going to watch a bear dance. It just seems like a cool thing to go watch. So they had bears. They're going to have a lot of animals that we might just call kind of domesticated cattle. So sheep and goats and cows. There were some goats on the island, especially in the mountains, prior to the Numenorians showing up, but they did bring over sheep and cattle and stuff like that. Most of the stuff ends up being domesticated, and this is where they get a lot of their meat from. There are eagles. Not to be confused with a bear, B-A-R-E, for those of you that can't see chat on the VOD. Bear dance, which is a totally different place that Shane does not want to go. Yes, I do not want to watch you do dances in the nude. That is not something that I would particularly care for. But there are eagles, and we mentioned this a little bit in the last stream in stream number 13, that there were 3 particular periods of time of the year. There are the 3 prayers to Eru, which are the sort of centerpiece of the Numenorian religion. They're worshiping, of course, Eru, Iluvatar, the creator of everything. And on 3 times a year, they go up to this big mountain in the center of the island called Tarma, and they have a king that recites these prayers. But while they're doing that, eagles show up. But the eagles actually live on the northernmost point of the island, which is the peninsula that's referred to as Forestar. So you could sometimes see eagles there, and you are really not supposed to mess with them. They, of course, are the servants and messengers of Manwe, who was the highest of the Valar, who were sort of like the demigods, or kind of pantheon almost, if you will, of the higher powers on Middle-earth, or Ea, technically. Middle-earth is a continent on the planet. So you don't mess with the eagles. You can see the eagles. You're supposed to be sort of reverent to the eagles because the eagles are basically watching you. So Claire's here and might appreciate this. There were sharks in Numenor, but what's an interesting turn of phrase here is that Tolkien says that it could be the luck or the design of the Valar that the sharks do not come very close to the shore. So it's not a threat. You could go swimming, or you could be on boats around the shore, and they're not going to come get you. So if you got out into the deeper water, you could go across or run across sharks. And of course, they're going to do a lot of fishing and exploring later on, so they're going to get to see quite a bit of those. Kite Elric asks, so this is like the history of Earth around the equator. So we're talking here about the fantasy realm of J.R.R. Tolkien, where you might have watched Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit movies, or more recently the War of the Rohirrim, or read Lord of the Rings or Hobbits or stuff like that. So, yeah, this is Middle Earth, as in Tolkien's Middle Earth. And Claire shares the shark emojis. Yeah. I knew that you would appreciate that. I wanted to make sure that I threw sharks in there. If you got to the deep water, you become second breakfast. What's up, Shasta? Welcome in. Good to see you. So you have a lot of other types of fishes as well, and there are both saltwater fish and freshwater fish. Especially in the southern part of the island, there are a lot of lakes and pools that fill up with fish, and there are eels. I don't know if you're a fan of eel, but there are eels, freshwater eels, in the rivers that you can catch, or in the marshes as well. So lots of fish, and this is actually a lot of where they get a lot of their food. There is a large amount of fishing being done in Numenor, so lots and lots of fish. Not even in Middle Earth can you escape your galophobia. Silver, you're going to have to tell me what that one is. I'm not putting it together as well as I probably should be able to. Sharks? No, that's not right. Maybe eels. I don't know. There are badgers and beavers and stuff like that. Squirrels. This is another kind of interesting one. There are several different types of squirrels. There are black squirrels, red squirrels, and sharks. Okay, I thought so, but like my language skills were failing me. Tolkien would be very sad with me. The squirrels were interesting. They also had brown squirrels, so 3 different types of squirrel. But squirrels were especially friendly, and especially Numenorian women liked kind of keeping squirrels as friends. The word pet is not really used. You would basically meet a squirrel, and then the squirrel would kind of hang out in the trees around your house. And then if you like left a window open or left a door open and invited the squirrel in, the squirrel would kind of just like come hang out in your house. And they were sort of companions of especially Numenorian women. And here's Risu. Yeah. Welcome in, Risu Degu. Good to see you. Did the sharks have lasers on their heads? No, probably not. They might have been the sacred, I don't know, watchers of Ulmo, who was the Valar in charge of the seas. But I don't know if he would have talked very much with sharks. He probably could, because the Valar can talk with all of the animals. You need this relationship. Yeah, so like if you just left the door open and invited the squirrels to come in, they would come in and like run around the house, and they were sort of just really cool to hang out with. Like when a kid made friends with a crow. The crows, they had ravens and crows on Numenor. But we'll get to the birds in just a second. And, I guess we're already here, so why not we do birds? Birds would also just kind of come hang out in your house. And even if you kept like a cage for the bird, you would leave the door to the cage open. And the what we might call domestic birds would just sort of go and come as they pleased. And the songbirds would just kind of come hang out in your house and sing stuff. The ravens in Middle Earth and in Tolkien's world actually can talk. If you have read The Hobbit, you'll know that there were ravens out at the Lonely Mountain, Kingdom of Erebor, and that you could talk with them, and they sort of kept watch and the last of the descendants of that line actually spoke with Bilbo, and so you can talk with the ravens. She's back to I tolerate you. Oh, well, I hope that gets patched over quickly. You have to not laugh when you see or hear Olmo because you think of the Red Muppet Wedding. Oh, okay, so Elmo. I gotcha. Yeah. That is so Raven. But there were lots of birds. The vast majority of birds in Numenor, well, I shouldn't say the vast majority, but there were a quite numerous amount of shorebirds. And shorebirds, especially gulls, are going to be quite common. And if you know anything about uh, the helm of the soldiers that are protecting the citadel in Lord of the Rings in Gondor, they have helms with wings on the sides of them like seabirds, and the crown that Aragorn wears at the end of Return of the King has wings on it like a great seabird. So these shorebirds and gulls and things like this are going to be very, very important, and they're going to be very familiar to the Numenorians. And this is actually going to be something that probably comes from Tolkien's life almost directly. He was a really big fan of the shore, and he especially liked the sort of south and western shores of England, where you have like the really big cliffs. I don't know if you've ever seen the white cliffs. So much of Tolkien's love for the shoreline and the sea gets sort of worked into his work, and the numerous seabirds are part of it. And there's a really good passage where Tolkien mentions that when Numenorian sailors are sailing, they know that they're home because they start hearing the birds. They start hearing the gulls, and that they don't even have to be able to see. They could be blind, but they would know that they're getting close to home because they hear all of the seabirds. So you got a solid week of I missed you cuddles, and we're back to normal cat in the body of a rodent behavior. I see. Not Numenor, but you love Radagast's sled pulled by rabbits. That is... Okay, I don't know if I should do... Well, I guess I should probably... That was something made up for the movies. That does not really seem to be the case in the text. Sorry. They did bring in horses, but the horses that they have aren't really big. They're also not like battle horses or work horses or anything like that. They do some work, but mostly they're just kind of like little riding horses that kind of get around, but they're not super big. What else have I... Oh, they have wild pigs, black and white versions. They have deer. The deer that they have are fairly small. They have red deer and fallow deer. So there are tortoises, and I've already mentioned weasels. They have what Tolkien describes as a great number of smaller animals, so things like mice and moles and things of that nature. And did I say all? Okay, so lots of birds. Again, I mentioned birds. Songbirds are very common. They have finches and wrens. Nightingales are pretty frequent. They have really big, like snowy white owls up in the northern part of the island. And I wanted to save this one for the end because I know that my wife is going to be a really big fan of this one. But they have these things that Tolkien calls a kelly. And an akelli is basically a large hedgehog. And they are very, very friendly towards people. and will kind of hang out with you and follow you around. And they aren't really a threat, even though they have, pokey quills. They mostly just eat bugs and worms and stuff like that. But like a big hedgehog, like maybe a small porcupine-sized hedgehog. Why? No, probably not as big as a capybara. Yeah. So maybe like a, I don't know, about a yay-sized. What is that? I don't know. We don't really have a lot of description about the size. Just he in fact calls them an urchin, like, so like they're pokey. Yeah, about as big as a bread box. There we go. But special Tolkien hedgehogs. So how do I get to this magical place? Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. All right. So how about some plants? Well, they have a lot of the same kind of plants that you would think that everybody has, right? There's grass and grasses and weeds and stuff like that. But what about specific kinds of plants? How about that? Well, they do have a native grapevine. And these are mostly up in the region of Harunistar, which is when I say up, there's a particularly elevated part of that has kind of like mountains and valleys in it. So if you go there, you can find natural grapevines, and over time, the Numenorians turn those into vineyards. So there are there carnivorous plants? There are no carnivorous plants in of any sort in Middle Earth that I'm aware of. Of course, somebody will now break out a footnote reference to a pitcher plant or something like that. That's in one offbeat reference thing that I don't know about. But to my knowledge, there are not carnivorous plants in Middle Earth. Claire's like, actually, hold on. I could be wrong. I'm wrong about many things, by the way. Trees, lots of trees, obviously. Birch and elm and oak and fir and beech and chestnut. So your sort of, good old-fashioned trees that you might find pretty much anywhere in the world. They do have fruit trees. What's interesting here is that most of the fruit trees are gifts that come over from the elves. The elves are going to be responsible for a lot of the specific flora of Numenor. And this is partially because when the elves start visiting, they want to sort of beautify the place. The elves that are visiting are from Valinor, the Undying Realms, which is the place where there basically is no death, so it's undying for a reason. And this land is very, very beautiful. It's where the Valar live. It's where the most powerful of the original elves live. It is a perfect place of peace and rest, and it's very, very beautiful. So when these elves come over and they make friends with the Numenorians, they want to bless them and bring them cool stuff. And one of the things that they bring are a lot of plants. There are a lot of flowers, especially, that get brought over and planted around the port city where most of the elves are going to dock when they come in to visit. And they're listed, a lot of them, and it's just in typical Tolkien fashion. They're all the original words, but there's not necessarily any sort of description given for most of them. We know that one of them was a very beautiful red flower. We know a couple of individual names of things, but the fruit trees, what I was getting back to, are probably gifts from the elves. Cherries and pears and apples are named specifically, and I would be down with that. If I just got to hang out and eat elven cherries and pears and apples, I'd be down with that. There are a couple of other types of trees that show up here. One of them is called Laurenke, and it's particularly noticed for the way that it blooms. It has these really long chains of very bright golden flowers when it goes into bloom. And the Numenorians love this tree because it's very, very beautiful. And they make up this this theory, or sort of this folklore element, that this branch of trees, sorry, I shouldn't have done that, that this tree type is descended from Laurelin. This is not an accurate description, and Tolkien actually footnotes himself telling us that it's wrong. But Laurelin was one of the two trees of the time of the trees. So the beginning of the world, there are a couple of different ways that the Valar tried to light the world. First it was dark, and then they made some lamps, and then Melkor pushed those over and set fire to the world and destroyed most of it. And then the Valar remade it, and they planted these two trees. And these two trees gave off light, and there were two of them, Laurelin and Telperion. Telperion is the silver tree, but Laurelin was the golden tree. So this particular tree that they call Laurenke in Numenor reminded them of the stories that they heard from the elves that referred back to this original tree that used to live in the Blessed Realm, even though it's not actually directly related to them. But there is a tree that is in Numenor that is related to one of the original trees, but it's Telperion. So Telperion was the silver tree, and there was a tree descended from it that lived in the court of kings, and originally this is a gift again from the elves, and that tree line gets saved in the destruction of Numenor and brought to Gondor. So if you know in the Lord of the Rings about the White Tree of Gondor, if you are the only person that ever subscribes at tier 2, you get to use the White Tree of Gondor emote. But that symbol is the symbol of the High King of Gondor, the tree with the 7 stars on it. But that tree comes from a line that grew in Middle-earth, that came from a line that grew in Valinor, that came from the original tree Telperion. And that's a really, really important symbol. And it's just a really cool story, too. This tree has given me Laurelin vibes. Numenoran who has never seen Laurelin. Yeah, because Laurelin at that point had been dead for about 4,000 years. So, yeah, you're not going to see that. Laurelin died at the end of the time of the trees, which is before the coming of the sun and the moon and before the first age. And we're in the second age now, so it's a long time ago. Right, a long time ago. So, Laurenke, beautiful tree though, very pretty, very beautiful, and remarked about that in the book. There is an interesting tree though that we'll talk about, and that is the Melinorn. And this is a pretty cool tie-in here with Lord of the Rings as well. So one of the trees that grew in Numenor, apparently natively, and there's a little bit of debate about whether or not the elves brought this from Valinor or if it grew in Numenor natively. But the Melinorn tree is basically the Malorn tree that you see in Lothlorien. So if you've ever watched the movie and you see the giant trees that are in Galadriel's area, they basically, her palace is in a tree. All of the cities are in the trees. Those trees came from Numenor, and a particular king, a guy named Tar Aldarion, gave some of the nuts of that tree to the elven High King Gil-galad. And Gil-galad tried to plant them where he was in Eregion, and they didn't grow very well, so he gave some of them to Galadriel, who took them to her place in Lothlorien and planted them there, where they grew quite well. And Galadriel gave one of the nuts of the Malorn tree to the hobbits, specifically to Sam, who planted it where the party tree used to be in the Shire, which is actually interesting because that's the sort of the region where the elves of the Second Age would have lived, and it grew to be one of the biggest ones in Middle-earth. So the tree that's planted in Hobbiton, not too far from where Sam and his children and Rosie live, has a lineage that goes all the way back to here in the Second Age on the island of Numenor. You really need to reread the Silmarillion and the Fall of Numenor. It's really good stuff. Now, it's not nearly as narratively entertaining as Lord of the Rings or as The Hobbit. It's a different type of literature. It's much more of a saga, and that is going to, in many cases, make it more inaccessible. There are a lot of names, and a lot of the names are very similar, and that makes it really hard for a lot of people to try to keep up with who is who. And what's really, really troublesome is that the characters will frequently change their names. So at one point you're looking at this guy and he's calling himself this, and then the next time you see this new person named that, you're like, who is that? You're like, oh, well, that's that. And I'm like, well, who? What do you mean he's that? Right? So, yeah, I like reading them a lot, and it won't be long before I pick up. I'm probably going to reread the Silmarillion this summer. It's time. But I might also reread Fall of Numenor instead. But I read Lord of the Rings every year. I've read Lord of the Rings every year since I was in the summer between second and third grade. So I always forget how many years that's been, but a long time. So trees. An interesting herb. So there are shrubs and bushes and herbs aplenty. And many of the areas that are wooded and forested are frequently referred to as sweet-smelling. So a lot of these are sort of naturally fragrant herbs. Yeah, I've read them more than 5 times. Correct. That is technically correct. But one of them is quite important and worth mentioning, and that is Athelas. Probably so, Silver. So the question here is, are there any herbs? I'm guessing here referring to some sort of smokable plant, some sort of tobacco plant or marijuana typed plant. Let me talk about Athelas, and then I'll come back to that. And I could actually give you a fairly well-developed conversation about that. I know it was maybe done perhaps in jest, but I can actually give you a lot of information about that. So Athelas is a really important herb that's grown here in Numenor, and it's specifically good for healing. And it is one of the chief ailment healers that's used in Numenor, and when they start moving into Middle-earth again around the middle part of the Second Age, they bring it to Middle-earth and plant it there. And this is kingsfoil. And if you know anything about... Do you mean kingsfoil? Why, that's a weed. It is a weed, because what's interesting is somewhere between the beginning of the Third Age and the Lord of the Rings period, most of the people forget what Athelas is. And they don't really know what its purpose is or what the use of it is. And this is really interesting because this is how we see Strider / Aragorn very frequently displaying his ties to Numenor. Because when Frodo gets stabbed on Weathertop, he goes and looks around the area knowing that Weathertop used to be a stronghold of former Numenorians, and he finds Kingsfoil and he uses that to treat the wounds on the wound on Frodo's shoulder. And then later on again, after the fight in Moria, he once again uses that to treat the scratch that's on Sam's head, and the spear, the spear that would have skewered a wild boar on Frodo's side. And then again at the end of Return of the King, after the Battle of Pelennor Fields, when Merry gets struck by the power of the ring wraith after stabbing him in the leg. And then when Éowyn and Faramir are both wounded in the battle, he uses Kingsfoil or Athelas to bring them back from the precipice of death. But that comes from Numenor. And when Aragorn uses this, he is linking his history with the history of Numenor, because Athelas was a big plant in Numenor that was brought to Middle-earth. And even if nobody else remembers it, he's the king, right? He has the lineage that goes back to these people. So he's the guy that's going to be able to deliver the healing. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Or at least that's what one old woman in Minas Tirith says. So to get back to Silver's question about herbs, if you've ever read all of the appendices to Lord of the Rings, which I know everybody does every single time, right? Everybody reads all of the appendices every time you read the story, right? Because it's part of the text and Tolkien put it there for us to read, right? Nobody just skips to the first chapter and then stops at the end of the last chapter, right? Everybody reads the appendices. The books aren't done until you read the appendices. So one of the preface appendices is called On Pipeweed. You fell asleep trying to read the appendices. That's fair. That's fair. They're not in the same narrative style. They're, in many cases, what we would call a chronology or perhaps a chronicle, where some of them are just like lists of reign years for kings of Rohan or for the stewards of Gondor or something like that, right? Anyway, if you read On Pipeweed, this is probably written by Mary, Mariota, of the Fellowship of the Ring. He talks about pipeweed, right? And pipeweed is something that is kind of unique, and it's not marijuana. It's not even close to marijuana. I get so many people that ask me so many questions about, is the pipeweed weed? And I'm like, it's not marijuana. And unfortunately, the movies only made it worse, because there's a line that Saruman uses towards Gandalf, and he says that the love of the halfling's leaf has dulled your mind. And everybody keyed in on that and said, oh, it's marijuana. It's not marijuana. That line was made up for the movie. It's not in the books. If you read On Pipeweed, it even tells you that it is a version of a nicotine-producing plant. So it's probably just some version of tobacco, right? It's just a version of tobacco. But the interesting question here is whether or not the plant came from Numenor originally, because there are different sort of versions of pipeweed. And there's a lot of debate here in the text itself about whether or not the original version of pipeweed was something that was cultivated in Numenor and then brought to Middle Earth, or if it's a naturally occurring plant in Middle Earth that the hobbits found and then started smoking. Now, what is interesting, and even on Pipeweed has to recognize this, is that the hobbits in the Shire claim to be the first hobbits that smoke pipeweed, but it was almost certainly the hobbits at Bree who lived at Bree before the colonies, before the Shire was a colony. So some of the hobbits from Bree went across the river and basically made the Shire, and they were probably already smoking pipeweed prior to that. But Tobold Hornblower gets a lot of credit as a hobbit that would be recognized as one of the first people that made this a commercial enterprise. And the most favored brand, if you will, of pipeweed is called Old Toby, which refers to Tobold Hornblower. And you can see this referenced in a couple of different places in the text of Lord of the Rings, but most specifically when Merry and Pippin are trouncing around after the Ents wreck Orthanc, and they find the pipeweed that Sauron had tucked away, and they comment like, "Oh, look, it's Old Toby," because there are the Hornblower emblems on the barrel, right? So this is what happens when you read Lord of the Rings as many times as I do. You've pretty much got the whole thing memorized. You would assume it was closer to tobacco than cannabis. Yes. Being that cannabis wouldn't have been really known in Europe. No. When Tolkien was writing, marijuana and cannabis use was very, very, very well known. That had been pretty commonly distributed all across Europe since the late early 1700s. Age of Exploration really opens all that stuff up. It was already illegal in some places by the time Tolkien was writing. Yeah, so Tolkien was writing most of this stuff in the it depends on when he started and when he finished. So roughly the 30s through the 50s of 1900. So yeah, it would have already been illegal in some places. Yep. So lots of that. Lots of flowers, though. I did mention the flowers, but native to Numenor were also a lot of lilies, especially water lilies and big lilies that would bloom in various different colors. This is actually one of the first things that the elves notice when they visit from Valinor, are all these beautiful lilies. And they go, "Oh, you already have beautiful flowers. Let's bring you more beautiful flowers." So that sort of triggers all of that stuff. But yeah, so again, this wasn't necessarily enough to make what we would call a full episode. Usually these run about 2 hours, and we're just now coming up on about an hour, and that's after I rambled quite a bit about pipeweed. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I had geared up here for 13.5. Remember, this is like a half episode. But as always, if anybody has questions about Middle Earth in general or Tolkien stuff, I'd be happy to answer as much as I can. I don't have any reference to mushrooms being in Numenor. We do know that mushrooms are a big deal on the continent of Middle Earth, because we do know, of course, that the hobbits do love them some mushrooms. But there is no reference that I'm aware of to mushrooms being in Numenor. What kind of single-celled organisms were in Numenor? I don't know the answer to that, Frank. That would be a great one if I could just like spit out this random virus or bacterium or something like that. But no, I don't have any reference to single-celled organisms in Numenor. I will say though that I have now moved all of my Tolkien lectures. A couple of summers ago, I did a Tolkien lecture series for a local university, and I recorded those. And they're much more like a lecture style because, again, this was a lecture series. But I have moved those over to YouTube, and I have them in their own little playlist. So if you are interested in learning how Tolkien came up with all of his ideas, the origin of the Tolkien lecture series that I did was how he found his motivation, the things in his life that he pulled from in order to come up with all of these fanciful ideas. So if you want to check out those, there are 4 of them. Each one is about an hour and 45 minutes long. I'm really proud of those. I did a lot of work on those, and you can go watch them on YouTube if you want to. Because I finished moving those over like earlier this week. So, they're called How He Got There and Back Again. Oh yeah, his mojo. You're right, exactly. That how Tolkien found his mojo, or how Tolkien got his groove back. Right. All right, Amoeba of the West. That's a good one. Okay, so if anybody has questions, now is the time to ask. How did they dye their clothes? I don't know the answer to that, too. I would guess some sort of pigment. But I do not know from which plants they used to dye them. You saw a video that reminded me of the change he had to make in The Hobbit to fit the storyline of Lord of the Rings. So there were a few. I could talk about that a little bit, Claire. So when Tolkien first started writing Lord of the Rings stuff, he was writing this collective mythos that was supposed to stand in as a unifying mythology for all of England. And it was supposed to tie in the Celtic and the Anglo-Saxon and the Briton and the Norman and the French and the Viking and the German stuff. It's supposed to mix all of that together and produce a sort of an origin story for England. And this is partially because in the late 1800s there had been a big push towards sort of national origin stories, and this had been something that had produced things like the Grimm's fairy tales, or in the case of Finland, the Kalevala, which is a collection of Finnish storylines or folk tales and stories from the history of Finland, which is actually a book that Tolkien just completely fell in love with. But he didn't have a book that did that for England. And he looked at things like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, these Greek or Roman stories that served as these really big epics that sort of gave purpose to these places and times. But England didn't have one of those, so he wanted to write one. And to do that, he started by trying to figure out how he could make everything make sense. And that's really where Middle-earth started in his head. And the first thing that he started trying to work on was this thing that he called the Book of Lost Tales. And there's this whole plot contrivance where an Anglo-Saxon guy would end up going to England for the first time and meet an elf, one of the last elves in England. And it was at this inn, the Forsaken Inn, and he would hear all of these stories of England's fanciful past with elves and magic and gods and all of these things. And this was supposed to be sort of like how he was going to fit all these different mythologies in. But turns out that nobody really wanted to publish that. And he couldn't finish it even to try to get it published. And so he started telling all of these stories that were sort of in it or around it. And he wrote some poetry that was in it. He wrote a couple of little kind of short stories that ended up kind of in it. But that's where The Hobbit came from. The Hobbit was a group of stories that he was telling to his kids as bedtime stories to get them to shut up and go to sleep. But he started writing it down, but he intended it to be one of these lost tales, and it fit into the sort of existing world at the time. But he at that point had not broken the history down into ages. At the time that he wrote The Hobbit, there was no Time of the Trees and First Age and Second Age and Third Age. There was just the Book of Lost Tales. And when he started trying to write the Lord of the Rings, because his publishers were just hounding him for, more Hobbit stuff, he actually tried to get them to publish the Book of Lost Tales, and they were like, does it have hobbits in it? And he was like, not really. So they were like, how about more Hobbit stuff? So he starts writing the Lord of the Rings fairly quickly, and the second chapter, where Gandalf and Frodo talk about the ring, that was one of the first things that he wrote in the text that went on to be the Lord of the Rings. And he actually stopped there for a while, because when he wrote that chapter, he suddenly kind of realized that he needed to make time dilate. He needed to stretch out the distance of time that all of these things happened. And he already had all of these stories. He already had Beren and Luthien and the fall of Gondolin, and he had the children of Hurin. He had all these things kind of worked out, these things that would go on to be the Silmarillion. But if The Hobbit took place at the same time that those things were taking place, obviously it wouldn't make sense in the context of the way that he was writing Lord of the Rings. So when he realized that he had all of these other stories to tell, he telescoped the time out. And he moved The Hobbit from happening contemporaneously with the First Age to being, somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000 years later, so that he could put all of this stuff in. And that's when he realized that the ring was the One Ring, that the ring had been forged by Sauron. So in the edits to The Hobbit, after The Lord of the Rings was published, he went back in and changed a little bit of that stuff to make the ring a little bit more self-aware, where it does things kind of on its own, and it's a little bit more tricky, so that the continuity of The Hobbit flows a little bit better into The Lord of the Rings. This is also why he changed the riddle game with Gollum, and then retconned that in Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, I could talk about that a lot. You hear nothing of reptiles. Nothing much is said of reptiles, Sam. That's a fair point. We don't. Well, the only reptiles that we get are tortoises. We know that there are tortoises in Numenor, but we don't get references to snakes. We don't get references to lizards. So all we know is tortoises. Next stream, the textiles of Middle-earth. So he wasn't writing The Hobbit in World War One. He actually didn't write very much of anything during World War One that had anything to do with Lord of the Rings. He wrote a lot of letters. He wrote the occasional poem, but nothing Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth related until after he got back. Well, Not before he was well. Okay, so he got sent back because he had trench fever and then some lingering effects from that. So he was still in the military, but he didn't like muster out until the end of the war. So, well, towards the end of the war. Anyway, he didn't start writing most of the Middle Earth stuff until after that. He had written, I think, one or maybe two poems prior to World War One. One of them about Arendelle is the first thing that ever gets written about that gets written about Middle Earth, and he wrote that before World War One, or before he went to World War One. The fact that Bilbo won, but it was not a one ring. He realized that it needed to be like the ring. Does the finished book teach you how to raise giant lake trolls? I don't know, Silver. I've never actually read all of the Kalevala. I've read some of it, but I've never read all of it. It's actually one of the books that I really, really want to read. If it's any good, it does. He changed some stuff. You can't read Finnish? Sure, I can't either. Unfinished Tales is like, I've got my copy of it like right there. I'm looking right at it. So, my Squishmallow Gandalf and I really enjoyed the stream. Well, you're very welcome. I hope that was illuminating. I really, really like Tolkien stuff, if it's not evident from 10-minute side rambles. All right. Never guessed. Yeah, I know, it's kind of crazy, right? All right, let's see who's streaming to see where we're going to go raid. Let's check out what... You do like the wall? Oh, thank you. I need to talk for another 30 minutes at least. Well, see, that's the thing, Cave. This was only supposed to be half of an episode. So it was only supposed to be somewhere between 40 and 50 minutes long because it's 13.5. You're disappointed that I never get to go to the Ghibli Island full of giant hedgehogs. Yeah, I know. I know. So we're going to go raid a new friend that I actually just kind of met last night, who is a guy named, well, his stream name is Nerduino, and he is a former NASA scientist. And he was doing a co-stream with friend of the channel, Casey Snow Art, and I got to catch about an hour of them talking last night, and it was just delightful. And I really liked the feel, so I gave the follow. Silver, you going to Japan, man? It's just killing me. Everybody's going to Japan except for me. Risu and partner went to Japan earlier this year. You're talking about going to Japan this year, and I'm just like... Anyway, so we're going to go raid Nerduino. Our battle cry is adventure, and if you have any of those cool adventure hat emotes, you can share those in the chat. If not, just adventure with lots of exclamation points will do. You're just tossing around the idea? Okay. Well, when you want to talk about stuff, I've already got like 3 trips planned. Never actually been, but I know everywhere to go. So, and Tad was showing pictures from his trip to Japan like last week. Ugh. Anyway, let's go raid Nerduino and say hi to a new friend. Right now, apparently, is looking at some astrophotography. So that's pretty wicked cool. But until next time, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out, and I hope you have a good one. I'll be back around maybe this weekend to try to do some stuff. Probably Saturday if I do stream. Try to get some Gundam stuff done. But yeah, thanks for coming by, everybody. I appreciate everybody supporting the stream as always. But until next time, take it easy.
This is a Globular cluster.